Dr. Thalassa Viridian wasn't your average geneticist, unless your average geneticist was holed up in a monastery on a barren rock light years from civilization, playing God with a side of monk's robe couture. The monastery, a relic of humanity's brief flirtation with asceticism, now housed a cloning lab so secret even the local rodents had signed non-disclosure agreements. Outside, Looney's was a planet as exciting as a bowl of interstellar oatmeal, gray, dusty, and perpetually overcast. Inside, it was a hive of scientific mischief. Thalassa leaned over a petri dish, scrutinizing the latest genetic cocktail. "You know," she said, her voice echoing in the eerie quiet of the lab, "in another life I could have been a celebrity chef." Brother Mirth, a monk who couldn't resist the allure of biotechnology, chuckled from across the room. His laugh was like gravel in a blender, grating yet oddly charming. "Sure, Thalassa. As long as your diners didn't mind an extra limb or two." "Hey, culinary innovation needs some sacrifice," she shot back, adjusting her goggles. The lab, with its sterile white walls and hum of machinery, was a far cry from a kitchen, but it was where Thalassa cooked up genetic breakthroughs instead of soufflés. The current project was supposed to be straightforward. Clone some plants, maybe a microbe or two, and send the results to the higher-ups who were too important or too scared to set foot on Looney's. But then, as fate or bad luck would have it, the alien virus showed up. Hitchhiking on a supply ship, it slipped through quarantine like a politician through a loophole. "The latest batch, Thalassa?" Brother Mirth asked, peering over her shoulder. His habit seemed more fitting for a medieval scribe than a man dealing with alien pathogens. "Yep," Thalassa confirmed, pointing at the dish. "Meet exhibit in why we can't have nice things." The virus wasn't much to look at, just a glistening blob of malevolence under the microscope, but its adaptability made it a nightmare. It had this charming habit of mutating faster than a teenager's mood swings, and it loved human hosts like a fat kid loves cake. "We should bottle it," Mirth suggested, a grin twitching at the corners of his mouth. "Call it instant chaos and market it to bored housewives." "Or reality TV producers," Thalassa returned, her eyes still glued to the dish. "They'd love a virus that could create drama without needing a script." They both laughed, a short, sharp sound that felt out of place in the antiseptic gloom. The truth was, Thalassa didn't feel much like laughing. The virus was a problem, and problems on Looney's tended to snowball. It was just a matter of time before the situation went from mildly annoying to "we're all screwed." As if on cue, the lab door slid open with a hiss. Enter Captain Grit Harlow, a man whose personality was as abrasive as his name. He had the sort of face that looked like it had been carved from granite using a rusty spoon. "Thalassa," he barked, skipping greetings like they were optional extras. "Got a situation." "Oh good," she replied, not looking up. "I was just thinking my day needed more existential dread." Grit ignored her, which was his default setting. He shoved a data pad under her nose. "Reports of people getting sick, real sick, spreading faster than lies at a political rally." "Great, so our little viral friend is out and about," Thalassa muttered, swiping through the data with a frown. Mirth leaned in, curiosity etched into his features. "How bad?" "Bad," Grit confirmed. "We've got a dozen cases in the last hour. It starts with a fever, then nausea, and before you know it, you're reenacting scenes from your favorite zombie apocalypse movie." Thalassa sighed, removing her goggles and rubbing her eyes. "Sounds charming. Any word from the higher-ups?" "Oh, they're thrilled," Grit said, sarcasm dripping from his voice. "Planning to send us all the thoughts and prayers we can handle. That'll help when we're coughing up our lungs," Mirth quipped, trying to lighten the mood. Thalassa didn't need to be told twice. She picked up her comms device and started barking orders. The lab went from quiet chaos to organized panic. Samples were collected, containment protocols initiated, and everyone wore masks that made them look like extras in a low-budget sci-fi flick. Despite the urgency, there was a grim sort of camaraderie in the air. It was the unspoken bond of people who knew they were up to their necks in cosmic sludge, but were determined to wade through it with style. As the hours ticked by, the situation outside worsened. Reports of the viruses spread filled the airwaves. Thalassa worked tirelessly trying to make sense of the data. The virus was learning, adapting like a particularly obnoxious student. By the time night fell, the lab was a war zone of discarded notes, empty coffee cups, and exhausted scientists. "How we doing, Doc?" Grit asked, leaning against a console. "Oh, just peachy," Thalassa replied, eyes glued to her screen. "If by peachy you mean one step away from a full-blown pandemic," Mirth, ever the optimist, piped up. "Maybe it'll mutate into something harmless, like, I don't know, a mild case of the giggles." Grit snorted. "Yeah, and maybe I'll wake up tomorrow with a full head of hair." The night dragged on and fatigue was setting in, but the team kept at it. Thalassa's mind was a swirl of hypotheses and half-formed plans. And then, just as despair threatened to claim victory, she saw it, a tiny pattern in the data, a flicker of hope amid the chaos. "I've got something," she announced, voice hoarse with exhaustion. Grit and Mirth crowded around, peering at the screen. "It's not a cure," she cautioned, "but it's a start. The virus has a weak spot, a sequence it can't mutate without losing its punch." Grit's eyes narrowed, interest peaked. "So we can exploit it." "That's the idea," Thalassa confirmed, her spirits lifting. "If we can target that sequence, we might just slow it down." The room buzzed with renewed energy. Plans were made, contingencies discussed, all with the grim humor that had become their trademark. But as they worked, a nagging thought gnawed at Thalassa. The virus had shown unparalleled adaptability. Who was to say it wouldn't find a way around this new roadblock? Outside, the storm raged on, a turbulent mirror of the battle within the lab. In the murky half-light of the early morning, when the mind plays tricks and hope is just a four-letter word, Thalassa found herself staring into the abyss. "Do you think we'll beat it?" Mirth asked quietly, his usual humor absent. Thalassa didn't answer right away. A beat passed, heavy with uncertainty. "I think," she said finally, "we'll fight it, and sometimes that's the best we can do." Grit, standing stoically beside them, nodded. "Damn straight." As they set to work, the first rays of an alien dawn crept over the horizon, casting the lab in a pale, cold light. The fight had just begun. But here on Loonies, against the odds and the universe itself, humanity had one thing going for it: a stubborn refusal to go quietly. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. Zenth Alurin was a man of few words and fewer hygiene practices, but he was good with a pipette, which made him a valuable asset in Thalassa's ragtag assembly of scientific misfits. He was fiddling with a vial when Thalassa noticed the expression on his face, a cross between someone who just discovered they'd stepped in something unpleasant and someone regretting last night's questionable food choices. "You all right, Zenth?" she called out, her voice cutting through the mechanical hum of the lab. The question was more reflexive than genuine concern. On Loonies, you learned quickly that caring too much for your colleagues was a one-way ticket to disappointment. Zenth looked up, his face pallid under the harsh fluorescence. "Yeah, just a bit warm," he mumbled, scratching at his arm like he was auditioning for a flea commercial. "Warm as in I forgot to turn the thermostat down, or warm as in feverish and possibly dying?" Thalassa asked, the hint of sarcasm she hoped would downplay the anxiety now tightening her gut. Zenth shrugged, which in Alurin speak could mean anything from "I'm fine" to "I'm about to hurl all over this expensive equipment." "Just warm," he repeated, which was not the reassuring answer she was hoping for. Brother Mirth drifted over, a concerned frown creasing his usually jovial features. "You look like you've been chewing on a plasma conduit, Zenth. You sure you're okay?" Zenth gave a weak smile that suggested he was anything but. "I'll be fine. Just need to sit down a moment." Thalassa exchanged a glance with Mirth. They both knew the signs: a fever, that distinct pallor, and the kind of lethargy one usually reserved for post-holiday hangovers. The virus had found its new host, and judging by Zenth's condition, it was getting cozy. "Let's get you to the medical bay," Thalassa suggested, trying to keep the edge out of her voice. No need to panic the rest of the staff. Yet. Yeah, good idea, Zenth muttered, swaying slightly on his feet like a wind-battered tree. As they shepherded him out of the lab, Grit Harlow, ever the harbinger of bad news, intercepted them. "What's the story?" he asked, eyes flicking to Zenth's ashen face. "It's not a bedtime story, that's for sure," Thalassa replied. "Our boy here is down with something more than a Monday morning mood." Grit's eyes narrowed, assessing the situation with the kind of pragmatism that made you want to punch him or thank him, depending on the day. "So, it's inside, huh? Feels like it," Thalassa admitted, her voice low. "We might have to lock things down, again." "Great, just what the board will love hearing." "Oh, by the way, our test subjects are now the scientists themselves," Grit said, his tone as dry as Looney's wastelands. He looked at Zenth. "Think you can keep your germs to yourself until we figure this out?" Zenth nodded, though it was less a promise and more a vague affirmation of consciousness. The medical bay was a cramped room that smelled faintly of antiseptic and regret. Thalassa helped Zenth onto the examination table, the paper cover crinkling under his weight. "Okay, Zenth, let's see what we're dealing with," she said, pressing a hand to his forehead. It was like touching a radiator. "Well, congratulations, you're our new patient zero," Zenth chuckled weakly. "Always wanted to be a trendsetter." "Yeah, the fashion is a bit questionable, though," Thalassa replied, slipping on a pair of gloves. "But I can see it catching on in all the wrong circles." Mirth hovered nearby, his expression somewhere between worry and curiosity. "What's the plan, Thalassa?" "Plan is," she began, fiddling with a datapad, "we get a sample, analyze this bastard, and hope we find something useful before it's reenacting a remake of Contagion in our intestines." "Sounds promising," Mirth said, the hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "Maybe it'll mutate into something that gives us superpowers." "Right?" Thalassa snorted. "Or it could just turn our skin played. I hear that's making a comeback." Zenth groaned as Thalassa drew a blood sample, the dark humor doing little to lift his spirits, or his fever for that matter. With the sample safely contained, Thalassa nodded to Mirth. "Keep an eye on him. If he starts foaming at the mouth, call me. Otherwise, just make sure he doesn't decide to start a zombie uprising." Grit poked his head through the door, clearly having eavesdropped. "Anything useful from the sample? Too soon to tell," Thalassa replied. "But if I find out Zenth's just got a nasty cold, I'm suing the universe for damages." "Get in line," Grit said with a snort, before disappearing back into the chaos of the lab. Hours dragged by, each minute stretching into eternity as Thalassa worked through the night. The lab was a flurry of activity, everyone moving with the urgency of people who knew they were up against a time bomb with a penchant for surprise parties. The data poured in, a relentless stream of numbers and graphs. Thalassa stared at the screens, trying to piece together the puzzle while the world spun around her. The virus was like a bad guest. It refused to leave and kept breaking things just for fun. When Brother Mirth came over with a cup of something that might once have been coffee, she accepted it gratefully, the bitter liquid both a balm and a jolt to her system. "Any progress?" he asked, leaning on the counter beside her. "Depends on how you define progress," Thalassa replied. "I've learned that the virus likes humans more than it should, but as far as stopping it goes, we're still in panic and prey territory." Mirth nodded, taking a sip of his own cup before grimacing. "Guess the cough is mutating too." "Wouldn't be surprised," Thalassa said, setting her cup aside. "But hey, maybe it'll evolve into something drinkable." They shared a moment of weary silence, the weight of their predicament hanging heavy in the air. The virus wasn't just a threat, it was a ticking clock, reminding them that time was running out. "Think we'll get through this?" Mirth asked, his voice soft. Thalassa considered her response carefully. "I think we'll give it one hell of a fight. Whether that's enough?" "Well, we'll see." Just then Grit returned, his expression as stormy as the skies outside. "Just got word from command. They're considering quarantine for all of Looney's." "Quarantine?" Thalassa echoed, her voice tinged with disbelief. "That'll go over like a lead balloon." "They're not thrilled about it either," Grit admitted. But with the virus spreading, they're running out of options. Great. So we're on our own then, Thalassa said, rubbing a hand over her face. Well, if we survive this, I'm definitely adding Savior of a Desolate Planet to my resume. Assuming there's anyone left to read it, Grit replied, though there was a flicker of determination in his gaze. But yeah, I've got faith in you, Doc. And with that backhanded compliment, Grit stomped off to deal with more bureaucratic nightmares. Thalassa returned to her work, her mind a careful balance of hope and resignation. The virus was playing a game and they were just pawns trying not to get knocked off the board. In the medical bay, Zenth was dozing fitfully, Mirth keeping a vigilant watch over him. Thalassa joined them, her presence a comfort in the growing uncertainty. "Still with us, Zenth?" she asked, her voice gentle. "Yeah," he croaked, opening one eye. "Hanging in there, not dead yet. That's the spirit," Thalassa said, giving him an encouraging smile. "You keep that up and you'll be back to avoiding showers in no time." Zenth chuckled weakly, the sound more wheeze than laugh. "Looking forward to it." As the Iors crept by, the virus continued its relentless march. The lab buzzed with activity, everyone working tirelessly to find a solution before it was too late. The data on Thalassa's screen shifted, a new pattern emerging. Her heart skipped a beat, a glimmer of hope flickering to life. "Hey, Mirth," she called, gesturing him over. "I think I've found something." Mirth hurried to her side, eyes scanning the screen. "What is it?" "The virus. It's got a weak spot. A protein it relies on that's surprisingly fragile," she explained, her voice tinged with excitement. "So we could target it?" Mirth asked, his own hope rising. "Possibly," Thalassa replied. "If we can interfere with its production, it might just cripple the virus enough to give us an edge." "Sounds like a plan," Mirth agreed, his grin infectious. "Let's get to it then." The lab came alive with renewed energy, the team rallying around Thalassa's discovery. The clock was still ticking, but for the first time they had a weapon of their own. As they worked, the tension in the air shifted, determination replacing despair. They were down but not out, and on this bleak, forgotten world that was a victory in itself. "Think we'll make it?" Mirth asked, echoing his earlier question. Thalassa's smile was small but confident. "I think we'll give that virus one hell of a run for its money." And with that, they dove back into the fray, ready to face whatever came next with stubborn defiance and a healthy dose of gallows humor. For on Loonies, in the shadow of a threat that loomed large, humanity's tenacity was its own kind of light. As long as they had that, they had a fighting chance. Thalassa squinted at the screen, rubbing the bridge of her nose with a sigh that probably carried halfway across Loonies. "So, if this alien bug has a weakness, it's hiding it better than we hide this lab from the monks." Brother Mirth, still valiantly attempting to look optimistic, peered over her shoulder. "We just need to keep poking it until it screams uncle." "Yeah, because viruses are known for their cooperative nature," Thalassa replied, her sarcasm as thick as the grimy coffee sludge at the bottom of her cup. Zenth, still looking like death warmed over, was propped up on a cot nearby. "Why we even here anyway?" "I mean besides the whole playing God aspect." "Ah, the eternal question," Mirth said, folding his arms. "Why are we here? Is there a purpose to our suffering, or are we just cosmic comedy?" Thalassa snorted. "If there is, the joke's on us." The lab was buzzing, a hive of activity, but more in the way a broken vending machine buzzes right before it spits out a soda, or doesn't because it's broken, and life is like that. Her team jostled around her, faces drawn with concentration and a hint of desperation. If they could just get a bead on this virus, they might stand a chance of not becoming its latest meal. Just then, the door slid open with a reluctant hiss, revealing the looming figure of Grit Harlow. "Time to add more plot twists," he announced, holding up a tablet like it was some kind of sacred text. Given their location, the irony wasn't lost on anyone. Thalassa sighed. "Great. What's it this time? Did Command decide to turn us into a reality show?" Grit chuckled darkly, the kind that didn't bring humor, just a reminder of how screwed they were. "Almost." They think there might be a connection between the virus and those old artifacts we've been using as paperweights. Thalassa blinked. You're saying this thing might be alien. Well, it didn't exactly hitch a ride on the supply ship by choice, did it? Grit replied, tapping his tablet. Records show some of those artifacts were found with, well, let's call it biological residue. Could be our charming little bug's ancestral home. Bloody hell, Thalassa muttered, pinching the bridge of her nose again. So we're sitting on a trove of alien relics that might hold the key to a galactic pandemic, Grit shrugged, or just more alien crap. Hard to say. Fantastic. We're archaeologists now, Mirth chimed in, rubbing his hands together. Always wanted to dig around in ancient alien dirt. Wait, no, I didn't actually. Thalassa leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling as if the solution might be written up there among the dust and cobwebs. So what do we do? Call in the ghost of Indiana Jones, dig through the archives, Grit suggested. See if anything matches up with what we're dealing with. Right, Thalassa said, standing up. Because if there's one thing this quarantine needed, it's a scavenger hunt. Mirth clapped Zenth on the shoulder. You up for a field trip, Patient Zero? Zenth gave a weak thumbs up. As long as I can sit down every 5 minutes, deal, Thalassa said, dragging him to his feet. Let's go play with some dusty old rocks. The archives were housed in the monastery's lower levels, in rooms that had probably started as something else entirely, like toilets. Dust coated everything in a layer so thick it was practically a second skin for the furniture. Shelves lined the walls, overflowing with data pads, scrolls, and the occasional moldy tome, because why not? You'd think we were trying to summon ancient gods down here, not decode a virus, Mirth observed, holding up a scroll with the tips of his fingers as if it might bite him. Thalassa was already elbow-deep in a pile of flimses. Maybe we are. With our luck, we'll just piss them off. Zenth sat heavily on a stool, examining a carved stone with half-lidded eyes. This looks like it'd make a great doorstop. Or a paperweight, Thalassa added, flipping through files with grim determination. All right, if anyone sees something that screams alien virus, sing out. Ior's passed, marked only by the occasional cough from Zenth, who seemed to be improving just enough to look miserable instead of terminal. Brother Mirth flipped through documents with the enthusiasm of someone at a particularly dull book club meeting, occasionally perking up with "this looks promising" before tossing the offending item aside. Grit wandered in, hands in pockets, trying not to breathe too deeply in the musty air. Find anything yet, depends, Thalassa said, squinting at a particularly faded manuscript. I've found a lot of things I wish I hadn't. Like how monks apparently have an affinity for bad poetry. Not helpful then, Grit said flatly. Not unless we want to bore the virus to death, Mirth quipped. Zenth held up a small, oddly shaped piece of metal, its surface etched with intricate patterns. This looks different. Thalassa leaned over, snatching it from his grasp. This doesn't look like anything we've cataloged before. Grit's brow furrowed as he examined it. Definitely not from around here. Might be worth a look. All right then, Thalassa said, pocketing the artifact. Let's see if we can coax any secrets out of it back at the lab. They trudged back to the lab, the artifact sitting heavily in Thalassa's pocket like a particularly burdensome secret. Once there, they set it under a scanner, the machine whirring as it analyzed the object with all the enthusiasm of a bored teenager at a museum. Mirth leaned over Thalassa's shoulder, squinting at the screen. So what's it say? Is it the key to the universe or just an alien's shopping list? More like a mystery novel, Thalassa replied, watching as lines of code spilled across the display. It's old. Really old. And it's got some kind of encryption. Great, Grit said, crossing his arms. Because we didn't have enough on our plate without trying to crack ancient alien cryptography. Well, if we're lucky, maybe it'll contain a cure for this damn virus, Thalassa said, her fingers flying over the keyboard, or at least a recipe for alien brownies. Mirth chuckled. Hey, I'd settle for a decent cup of coffee. As they worked, the lab seemed to close in around them. the machinery humming softly like a hive of frustrated bees. The alien artifact sat impassively in the scanner, offering no more insights than a particularly stubborn crossword puzzle. But Thalassa was nothing if not persistent, and she attacked the problem with the kind of dogged determination usually reserved for middle managers and toddlers in candy stores. The minutes crawled by, each one heavier than the last, until finally the scanner beeped in triumph or at least mild interest. Thalassa sat back, raising an eyebrow. "Well, what do you know, what?" Grit asked, peering over her shoulder. "This thing might be some kind of data storage," Thalassa explained, gesturing at the screen. "The patterns suggest it's holding information about the virus." Mirth asked, his voice tinged with hope. "Only one way to find out," Thalassa replied, fingers dancing across the keyboard as she worked to decode the artifact's secrets. The lab fell silent, the air charged with a sense of anticipation, as if they were on the brink of something monumental, or at the very least mildly interesting. The screen flickered, the lines of code shifting and reforming until finally they resolved into something akin to text. "Looks like some kind of log," Thalassa said, scanning the characters. "It mentions a containment breach." "Breach?" Grit echoed, leaning closer. "You mean the virus? Seems likely," Thalassa agreed. "The text is fragmented, but it talks about a biological entity escaping containment, which means someone or something had this bug in a box before it got out," Mirth said, his eyes wide. Thalassa nodded, her mind spinning with possibilities. "And if we can piece together why or how it got out, we might be able to figure out how to stop it." "Well, that's a comforting thought," Zenth said dryly, his voice still hoarse but carrying a hint of humor. "We're just living in an alien experiment, and doing a bang-up job of it," Mirth quipped. The artifact's message was tantalizingly incomplete, its secrets hidden beneath layers of time and alien logic. But it was a start, and in their line of work, a start was often the best they could hope for. "We'll keep working on it," Thalassa said, determination etched on her face. "If this thing holds the key to the virus, we'll find it." "Yeah, because we've got nothing better to do," Grit added with a smirk. As they settled back into their routine, or as much of a routine as you could have in a quarantine on a barren rock, they kept the artifact under scrutiny, prying at its secrets with the persistence of a cat with a locked door. Hope was a rare commodity on loonies, doled out in drips and trickles. But for now, it was enough to keep them going, enough to keep them fighting. And with each passing hour, the stakes grew higher, the mystery deepened, and the virus loomed ever larger, a shadow cast by an ancient hand reaching across the eons. But if there was one thing humanity had proven time and again, it was that they were remarkably stubborn creatures. Even when the universe conspired against them, even when the odds were stacked with the kind of malice usually reserved for bureaucratic processes or bad sequels, they would fight. And sometimes, just sometimes, they even won. The scanner's beep had barely faded when the lab's door slammed open with all the subtlety of a supernova, heralding the less-than-welcome return of Brother Mirth. "So I hear there's a galactic Cold War brewing. Always wanted to be on the front line of one of those," he said, grinning like a fox in a henhouse. Thalassa rubbed her temples, which were beginning to feel like they'd been on the receiving end of a sledgehammer. "What now? Seems those alien artifacts everyone thought were just quaint souvenirs might be a little more," Brother Mirth said. He tossed a data pad onto the table with a casual flick of his wrist. "News is, our friends out there think we're cooking up a new supervirus to take over the universe." "Fantastic," Thalassa muttered, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Because clearly, we're the kind of people who can't even handle a toaster without almost burning down the kitchen." Zenth managed a weak smile from his stool, looking more like a ghost with each passing minute. "I'd say we've got bigger problems, like how to keep me on this side of the grave." "Cheer up, Zenth," Grit said, not looking up from his tablet. "There's nothing like a universal conspiracy to take your mind off your own impending demise." Thalassa leaned forward, peering at the data pad. So, who's pointing fingers? The usual suspects. Yep, the whole menagerie of paranoid intergalactic neighbors, Mirth replied, leaning against the wall. They've got nothing better to do than accuse us of bio-warfare. They're talking about sanctions, blockades, you name it. Well, isn't this just the cherry on top of a shit sundae, Thales aside? So now not only do we have a virus that's making a good attempt at wiping us out, but we've also got half the galaxy ready to go to war over it. Why do I get the feeling this was all a bad idea? Zenth croaked, earning a sympathetic pat on the back from Mirth. Because it was, Mirth said cheerfully. But hey, at least you're not dying alone. Small comforts, Zenth replied before being overcome by a coughing fit that seemed to shake the very foundation of the monastery. Thalas's eyes flicked to Grit. What's the plan, fearless leader? Grit shrugged, an expression that seemed to imply he'd rather be anywhere else. We need to find allies. Someone who might be willing to listen rather than shoot first. Great, Thalassa said, leaning back in her chair. But who exactly is going to believe a bunch of monks and a failing quarantine crew over the intergalactic rumor mill? That's the kicker, Grit replied, flipping through his tablet with the desperation of a man searching for a miracle. But we need to try. If this gets out of hand, the whole quadrant could be dragged into a war over something we don't even understand. Then we better get moving before they decide peace negotiations are overrated, Mirth added, his grin sharp. A somber silence filled the room, only broken by Zenth's labored breathing. Thalassa glanced at him, then at Grit. We can't leave Zenth behind. Zenth shook his head weakly. I'm dead weight. Don't be an idiot, Thalassa snapped. You're coming with us. And just how do we plan on sneaking out of a heavily monitored facility with a man who's about as lively as a wet noodle? Mirth asked, ever the optimist. We'll improvise, Thalassa replied, standing up with determined resolve. Besides, it's not like they can make things much worse, can they? Never say things like that out loud, Grit warned. But there was no stopping the small, resolute team now. They moved with purpose through the labyrinthine corridors of the monastery, their footsteps echoing like whispers of dissent against the silence. The air was thick with the scent of must and fear, mingling with the mechanical hum of the hidden lab. You know, I always thought the end of the world would have more explosions, Zenth commented, his voice a rasping shadow of its former self. We'll save those for later, Thalassa replied as they reached the outer door. Right now, we just need to keep moving. The door creaked open, revealing the barren landscape of loonies beyond, the kind of view that inspired people to write bleak poetry or drink heavily. The sky was a dull gray, the sun barely a smudge against the horizon. Ah, loonies, Mirth said, breathing in deeply, where the air tastes like despair and the view makes you question your life choices. Less poetry, more stealth, Grit advised, checking his tablet for any signs of pursuit. We've got about an hour before someone notices we're gone. Then let's not waste it, Thalassa said, helping Zenth as they made their way across the rocky terrain. The landscape offered little in the way of cover, just endless stretches of jagged rocks and the occasional scrubby bush that looked more like an afterthought than actual vegetation. The monastery loomed behind them, an ancient sentinel against the encroaching night. As they trudged forward, Thalassa couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The whole galaxy seemed poised on the brink of chaos, and here they were, four mismatched souls against the universe. They reached a small outcropping where they could catch their breath and gather their thoughts. Zenth sank to the ground with a groan, his face pale and drawn. All right, brain trust, Grit said, glancing around. Who do we know that might be willing to help without shooting us on sight? Not many people fall into that category, Thalassa admitted, scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. But there might be someone. Oh, Mirth asked, raising an eyebrow. And who might this mysterious benefactor be? An old contact of mine, Thalassa replied, not meeting their eyes. Goes by the name Callista. She's not exactly what you'd call legit, but she might be willing to help for the right price. Define not legit, Grit said cautiously. Let's just say she's got a bit of a reputation for dealing in unconventional goods, Thalassa said, her lips twitching into a wry smile. So we're turning to a smuggler? Zenth asked, his voice a mix of incredulity and resignation. Desperate times, desperate measures, Thalassa said. Besides, Callista owes me a favor. Oh well, if she owes you a favor, then this should be a piece of cake, Mirth said, rolling his eyes. I mean, when have favors ever gone wrong, right? Thalassa ignored him, focusing instead on the path ahead. We just need to get to her before anyone else decides to start asking questions. Then let's move, Grit said, helping Zenth to his feet once more. Because I have a feeling our time's running out. With little else in the way of options, they pressed on into the twilight, their minds racing with the possibilities of what lay ahead. The landscape changed, ever so slightly, as they moved further from the monastery, twisted rock formations and shifting sands creating a landscape that was both alien and hauntingly familiar. The sense of urgency propelled them, a silent companion urging them forward as they navigated the treacherous terrain. Every so often, Thalassa would cast a glance back at the monastery, its silhouette stark against the evening sky, a reminder of everything they were leaving behind. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached a small outpost nestled against a cliffside, a patchwork of metal and stone that looked more like a survivalist's dream than a sanctuary. This is it, Thalassa said, her voice barely above a whisper. Callista's place. Charming, Mirth commented, eyeing the structure with a mixture of skepticism and amusement. Looks like something a madman put together with spare parts. Pretty much, Thalassa agreed, leading them to the entrance. They paused at the door, the moment hanging heavily in the air like the last breath before a plunge into the unknown. Well, here goes nothing, Thalassa said, rapping her knuckles against the metal with a confidence she didn't quite feel. The door swung open to reveal a figure clad in a mishmash of garments that could only be described as eclectic, a patchwork of colors and textures that seemed to defy logic or fashion. Her eyes glittered with mischief and intelligence, her smile wide and welcoming. Thalassa, Callista said, her voice as smooth as silk. I was wondering when you'd come crawling back. Hello, Callista, Thalassa said, a hint of nervousness in her voice. We need your help. Of course you do, Callista replied, stepping aside to let them in. And what, pray tell, do you need this time? A little bit of everything, Thalassa admitted, casting a glance at her companions. A place to lay low, some information, maybe a way out of this mess. Callista raised an eyebrow, her interest piqued. Sounds like you've gotten yourself into quite the predicament. Let's just say the galaxy's got its panties in a twist, and we're the ones caught in the middle, Mirth quipped, earning a chuckle from their host. Well, Callista said, gesturing for them to sit. I suppose we'd better get started then. Troubles best dealt with over a stiff drink. As they settled in, the weight of the journey fell away, replaced by the sense of camaraderie that only the truly desperate could muster. The outpost was a precarious haven, but it was a haven nonetheless, and for now, that was enough. With their fates intertwined and the universe edging closer to calamity, the four of them steeled themselves for what lay ahead. The battle was far from over, but they were ready to meet it head-on, with all the grit and determination that humanity could muster. And perhaps, on this forgotten rock at the edge of space, they might just find a way to turn the tide. The outpost was a cozy pit of chaos, the kind of place where every surface seemed covered in a layer of grime and bad decisions. The walls were a patchwork of scavenged metal, a testament to Callista's penchant for recycling and her absolute disdain for interior design. The air was thick with the smell of burning electronics, and a hint of desperation, which, given the circumstances, seemed fitting. Welcome to my humble abode, Callista said, looking around with something resembling pride. Ignore the mess. I like to think of it as organized chaos. Makes our lab look like a sterile paradise, Thalassa muttered, glancing at a pile of wires that seemed to be having an existential crisis in the corner. What's this place powered by? The hopes and dreams of failed inventors, Mirth quipped, giving a makeshift generator a skeptical kick. Pretty much, Callister replied, her grin unfazed. Now let's get down to business. You said something about a galactic catastrophe. Sounds exciting. Exciting is one word for it, Grit said dryly, leaning against a wall that creaked ominously. We've got a virus on our hands that could spark a war wider than my patience. And that's saying something, Mirth added, earning a glare from Grit. Indeed, Thalassa cut in, trying to steer the conversation back on track. We think the virus might be linked to some alien artifacts. It's already causing political ripples that could turn into tsunamis. Callista's eyes gleamed with interest. Alien artifacts, you say? Color me intrigued. Got anything to show for it? We had a few, Thalassa replied, rubbing her temples. But they're back at the monastery, and let's just say security isn't exactly our friend right now. No kidding, Zenth rasped, his voice strained like he'd swallowed a porcupine. It's as if they don't appreciate the finer points of bioethics. Callista chuckled, pulling a bottle from a nearby shelf and pouring drinks with the precision of someone who'd spent a lifetime drowning sorrows. So you're on the run, short on time, and looking for a miracle. Lucky for you, miracles are my specialty. We could use one, Grit admitted, taking a sip that suggested he was past caring about the drink's potential to dissolve his esophagus. So, what do we do? Mirth asked, clearly enjoying the theatrics of the moment. Do we pray to the great cosmic gods for intervention, or do you have something more practical in mind? Praying never pays the bills, Callista said, settling into a chair that looked like it could collapse at any moment. No, I think it's time we take a closer look at those artifacts you mentioned. Any chance you've got data on them? Thalassa nodded, retrieving a battered data pad from her pack. I've recorded as much as possible. Scans, readings, everything short of a seance. Excellent, Callista said, leaning forward with interest. Let's see what secrets these little treasures are hiding. The room fell silent as she studied the data, her fingers dancing across the pad with a familiarity that spoke volumes about her skills. The rest watched, a motley crew clinging to a thread of hope in an unraveling universe. Zenth, pale and sweating, shifted uncomfortably. Not to rush genius, but I'm not getting any healthier here. Right, Thalassa said, glancing his way. Time's not exactly on our side. I know a guy, Callista said suddenly, her eyes still on the screen. An expert in xenorchaeology, bit of a recluse, but he owes me some favors. If anyone can make sense of this, it's him. Another friend with questionable hobbies, Mirth asked, his tone light despite the tension, like he was hosting a particularly dire game show. The best kind, Callista shot back, but he's not exactly local. We'd need to move fast. And how do you propose we do that? Grit asked, his skepticism as apparent as ever. Our options are limited, and I doubt the monks are issuing hall passes. Callista tapped her nose, a gesture that couldn't decide if it was conspiratorial or just an itch. I might just have a ship stashed away. Nothing fancy, but it'll get us where we need to go. Wait, Thalassa said, processing the information. You have a ship and you didn't lead with that. I like to keep a few aces up my sleeve, Callista replied, her smile as sharp as a knife. Besides, where's the fun in giving away all my secrets at once? Wonderful, Zenth groaned, shifting his weight. Can we get moving before my insides decide to make a break for it? All right, let's do this, Thalassa said, feeling a flicker of determination in the face of overwhelming odds. Callista, lead the way. They rose as one, the gravity of their mission momentarily lifting their spirits. Even Zenth seemed to find a second wind, though whether it was out of hope or sheer stubbornness was anyone's guess. The group moved with purpose, weaving through the cluttered space that seemed to close in around them, a testament to Callista's resourcefulness and disregard for conventional storage solutions. The outpost felt alive, a chaotic symphony of buzzing equipment and blinking lights that served as a reminder of the precarious world outside. As they reached a heavy door at the back, Callista paused, casting a glance back at her new compatriots. This isn't going to be easy, she said, her voice taking on a rare note of seriousness. But then nothing worth doing ever is. Great, Grit said, pushing past her. The universe is a flaming dumpster fire, and we're the ones holding the extinguisher. What could possibly go wrong? The door slid open with a groan, revealing a narrow passage that led to a concealed hangar. Inside sat a ship that looked every bit as cobbled together as the rest of Callista's operation, a patchwork of parts from different models. It was a miracle it held together at all. "Behold the rust bucket," Callista said with a flourish. "She might not look like much, but she's got it where it counts." "Another work of art," Mirth commented, eyeing the ship with a mixture of admiration and horror. "Let's hope she's less rust and more bucket." "Trust me," Callista said, leading them aboard. "She'll get us where we need to go, even if we have to push her the last few miles." As they settled into the cramped interior, Thalassa took a seat next to Zenth, who looked as though he might collapse any moment. His skin was pale, his breathing labored, and she couldn't shake the feeling that every minute counted. "Hang in there, Zenth," she said, attempting to inject some confidence into her voice. "We're not leaving you behind." "I'm trying," he replied, managing a weak smile. "But if I die on this heap, I'm haunting you all." "Noted," Thalassa said, trying to suppress a smile. "We'll get you through this." The ship shuddered as Callista powered it up, engines roaring to life with a sound that suggested they were protesting their very existence. As they lifted off, the outpost and the barren landscape of Loonies fell away, replaced by the infinite expanse of space. "Well, here we go," Grit said, settling into the pilot's seat. "Off to meet a hermit on a rock. Just another day in the life." "Let's hope he's got some answers," Thalassa said, looking out at the stars. "Because right now, hope's all we've got." "Hope and a ship held together by duct tape," Mirth added, chuckling darkly. As the rust bucket sped through the void, the weight of their mission settled over them once more. The galaxy was spinning toward chaos, and they were at the heart of it, clinging to the fragile thread that was their only chance at salvation. With Zenth's condition worsening and their time running out, there was no choice but to press on. They were a ragtag band against the universe, but they were determined to make their stand. Despite the odds, there was a glimmer of hope, a stubborn refusal to bow to the chaos. And in the cold, infinite darkness of space, they held onto that hope, knowing it might be the only thing standing between them and oblivion. As they journeyed onward, the crew could almost feel the universe holding its breath, waiting to see if these flawed, irreverent humans could turn the tide against all odds. Only time would tell, but for now, they had no choice but to fight with everything they had. The rust bucket rattled through space, a metal testament to optimism over common sense, or maybe just desperation. Inside, the air was thick with tension and the unmistakable scent of burning wires. Zenth coughed, sounding like a bag of nails being shaken angrily. "Remind me again," Mirth said, picking at a panel that looked like it might fall off. "Why are we trusting a ship cobbled together with hope and duct tape?" "Because we're fresh out of luxury cruisers," Thalassa replied, squinting at the flickering console. "And because Callista assures us this flying scrapyard has the best chance of not exploding mid-flight." "No promises, though," Callista chimed in from the co-pilot's seat, her eyes never leaving the blinking lights of the nav system. "Just think of it as an exciting gamble. You wanted more excitement, right?" "Excitement wasn't exactly what I had in mind," Zenth wheezed, clutching his side. "I was leaning more towards peaceful, uneventful survival." "Yeah, sorry, we're fresh out of that too," Grit said, steering with one hand and holding a cup of something that might have once been coffee. "Now, less whining, more planning. We need a strategy to get past those monks." "The monks who are blissfully unaware of our little science fair project under their robes," Mirth added with a smirk. "Should be a walk in the park." "Not just any park," Thalassa corrected. "A park littered with landmines and laser turrets. You know, the fun kind." "All right," Grit said, glancing back at the crew. "Let's hear the grand plan, Doc." Thalassa took a deep breath, her eyes flicking to her data pad. "The alien artifacts, whatever they are, contain something akin to a security protocol. Like a biological encryption that ties into the virus. It's not just random chaos. There's a method to the madness." "Meaning?" Callista asked, eyebrow arched. Meaning, Thalassa continued, if we can decode the rest of the data back at the monastery, we might be able to isolate the virus's kill switch. Neutralize it before it spreads further. Neutralize the virus or just us in the process, Zenth asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Preferably just the virus, Thalassa said, forcing a smile. But hey, it's a work in progress. So we sneak in, Mirth summarized. Hack some data and make a quick getaway before the monks start asking awkward questions. How hard could it be? Famous last words, Grit muttered, setting his cup down with a clatter. Well, what are we waiting for? Let's go ruin some holy men's day. Callista punched in coordinates, and the ship adjusted its course with a shudder, veering back towards Loonies. The gravity of their mission pressed down on them, heavier than the recycled air of the rust bucket. As they flew, the crew lapsed into a heavy silence, each of them wrestling with their own thoughts. Mirth hummed a tune that sounded like a dirge, while Zenth closed his eyes, focusing on forcing air into his battered lungs. Thalassa and Grit exchanged the occasional grim look, an unspoken agreement hanging between them. So Thalassa, Callista said, breaking the quiet, what's your plan for getting in, assuming we don't just knock on the front door and hope for the best? A bit of subtlety, I think, Thalassa replied. I've got a few back doors into their systems. Some old contacts might still be friendly. Friendly enough to risk a firing squad, Mirth asked, raising an eyebrow. Well, no one's perfect, Thalassa said. But they're good people, or at least better than most. Great, we're relying on better than most, Grit said, rolling his eyes. I feel so much safer already. Hey, it's all about setting the bar low, Mirth joked. That way any success seems monumental. The monastery loomed ahead, a dark shape against the glowing moonscape of Loonies. The ship's comms crackled with static, and for a moment everyone held their breath. All right, Callista said, flicking a few switches, we're going to need one hell of a distraction. I've got an idea, Mirth said, his grin mischievous. How about a power surge? I've tinkered with the monastery's generators before. Should give them something to panic over. Messing with power grids again, Mirth? Thalassa asked, trying to hide her smile. Does that ever get old? Hey, it's a classic for a reason, Mirth said, spreading his hands. Besides, who doesn't love a good blackout? Let's just hope the monks have flashlights, Grit said, setting the ship on a landing path. Or at least a sense of humor. With a barely perceptible thud, the rust bucket touched down in the shadow of the monastery walls. The crew disembarked, the cold air biting at their skin. Okay, Mirth, do your thing, Callista said, glancing nervously at the darkened windows. Consider it done, Mirth replied, pulling out a small device and fiddling with the settings. Just give me a minute. As Mirth worked, Thalassa led the way towards a side entrance, her mind racing with calculations and contingencies. Grit followed closely, the rest of the crew fanning out to cover them. Here we go, Mirth announced triumphantly, pressing a final key. Moments later, the monastery's lights flickered and went dark, plunging the courtyard into shadow. Perfect, Thalassa whispered, nodding to Grit. Let's move. They slipped inside, the corridors eerily silent. Thalassa's heart pounded in her chest, each step echoing like a gunshot in the stillness. Remind me never to go on a heist with you again, Grit murmured, peering around a corner. Remind me not to invite you next time, Thalassa shot back, her voice low. They reached the lab door, a relic of their clandestine operations. Thalassa punched in a code, fingers shaking with adrenaline and fear. The door hissed open, revealing the familiar hum of machines and blinking screens. Home sweet home, Mirth commented, slipping inside. Let's hope it stays that way, Thalassa replied, rushing to the main terminal. She plugged in her data pad, fingers flying over the keys. As the system booted up, a stream of information flooded the screen. Thalassa's eyes flicked over the data, searching for the patterns she knew were there. Anything? Grit asked, glancing over her shoulder. Working on it, Thalassa said, her mind racing. The pieces were there, tantalizingly close to connecting. She just needed, there, she breathed, eyes widening. That's it. Care to enlighten the rest of us? Zenth asked, leaning heavily against a console. The artifacts, Thalassa explained, they're part of a network. a failsafe designed to contain threats. The virus is a key, but we've got to reprogram the lock. Sounds complicated, Mirth said, scratching his head. And by complicated, I mean impossible. Not if we can access the monastery's archives, Thalassa said. There's an old database buried under layers of dust and bureaucracy. So it's a race against time with a side of archaeology, Callista asked, crossing her arms. Sounds like a party. Could be worse, Grit said, eyes scanning the lab. Could always involve lasers. Lasers would be preferable, Zenth muttered, trying to hide a grimace of pain. At least they're straightforward. All right, Thalassa said, unplugging her data pad. We've got what we need, now for the hard part. Getting out without attracting attention, Mirth guessed, his expression a mixture of excitement and dread. Exactly, Thalassa nodded, packing up quickly. Let's move before someone notices the lights are out. They edged out of the lab, the darkness both a shield and a threat. The corridors seemed to stretch endlessly, every shadow a potential enemy. As they neared the exit, Thalassa's heart sank. Voices echoed down the corridor, growing louder with each second. Looks like the monks finally caught on, Grit whispered, glancing back at the group. Time for Plan B, Callista said, her tone calm despite the tension. And Plan B is? Mirth asked, edging towards the shadows. Run like hell, Thalassa replied, her voice tight with urgency. Together they bolted down the hallway, the sounds of pursuit ringing in their ears. The crew moved as one, adrenaline propelling them forward. The door loomed ahead, a narrow escape route in the encroaching chaos. Thalassa pushed through, the cold air biting her skin as they stumbled into the night. The path back to the ship was a blur, feet pounding against the ground, lungs burning with exertion. Behind them, the monastery lights flickered back on, illuminating the chase. Almost there, Grit shouted, urging them on. The rust bucket stood waiting, its battered form a beacon of salvation. They piled inside, Callista slamming the hatch closed with a breathless laugh. Go, 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 Zenth urged, his voice a rasping whisper. Grit didn't need to be told twice. The ship rumbled to life, engines protesting as they lifted off. The ground fell away, the monastery shrinking into the distance. Well, Mirth said, leaning back with a grin, that was invigorating. Let's not do it again, Thalassa replied, her heart still racing. Seconded, Zenth groaned, eyes closed as he leaned against the wall. But at least we're in one piece. For now, Callista said, her gaze fixed on the stars ahead. We've got what we need. Now we just have to figure out how to use it. And hope we're not too late, Grit added, steering them into the vast expanse of space. Thalassa nodded, exhaustion pulling at her limbs. They were far from safe, the path ahead fraught with uncertainty. But they had a chance, a slim hope clutched tightly in their hands. It would have to be enough. The rust bucket cut through space like a butter knife through a particularly grisly chunk of steak. Back on Looney's, the monastery probably still had their underoos in a knot from the visit, but no one here was in a rush to ask for a Yelp review. Thalassa Viridian found herself wedged between the cockpit and the central console, elbows deep in wires and bad decisions. Remind me why we don't upgrade this pile of bolts, Zenth rasped, his voice a discordant mix between a whisper and a wheeze. He was lounging, not out of laziness but necessity, against the wall, his expression that of a man who had just discovered his favorite bar no longer served booze. Because, Zenth, budget constraints is the polite way of saying we can't afford crap, Thalassa replied, yanking a wire with more force than was likely necessary. The ship rewarded her effort with a shower of sparks that illuminated her face with a look that was part determination, part resignation, and a dash of, why the hell did I get out of bed today? You know, I really should have stayed with the monks, Zenth continued, not missing a beat. At least they had a great healthcare plan. All the meditation and herbal tea you could stomach. Yeah, well, unless their herbal tea can fix the intergalactic equivalent of a bad cold, I think we'll stick with Plan A, Thalassa shot back, not looking up. She could hear the clink of Grit's mug as he refilled it. Coffee, the universe's currency of endurance. I don't know, Grit chimed in, inspecting the bottom of his mug with a critical eye. Racing against time to avert a galaxy-wide catastrophe sounds like a picnic compared to the last time I had to deal with monks. I think they called me a heretical nuisance. Or was it blasphemous pest? Callista suggested, not looking up from the nav system she was mercilessly prodding into compliance. Could have been both, Grit conceded. I tend to leave lasting impressions. Unlike this ship, Mirth added, shooting the rust bucket a look that could curdle milk. I've seen hibernating grizzles move faster. Okay, enough with the love letters, Thalassa snapped, finally extricating herself from the console. I think I've got something. The crew crowded around like kids peering over a particularly juicy bit of gossip. The screen flickered to life, displaying a complex web of data that would make a spider weep with envy. What are we looking at? Callista asked, tilting her head as though a new perspective might make it all clearer. A roadmap, Thalassa explained, her finger tracing the lines. The virus isn't just a random act of alien spite. It's a failsafe, one of many designed to quarantine threats. Well, that sounds like someone was overly cautious, Grit commented dryly, or just plain paranoid. Either way, it's tied into the monastery's archives, Thalassa continued, her voice growing more urgent. We have to reprogram the failsafe. Otherwise, all those artifact souvenirs people brought back aren't just knickknacks, they're ticking time bombs. Great, so we've gone from dodging angry monks to hacking ancient alien tech, Zenth groaned. Next you'll tell me we need to do it in under 10 minutes. Realistically, Mirth interjected, more like 5. Piece of cake, Callista said, her tone eerily calm. As long as you've got the right ingredients. Then let's get cooking, Thalassa said, queuing up the relevant data and hoping their makeshift plan held together long enough to save their skins. The monastery loomed again, just as unwelcoming as they left it. The crew disembarked with the enthusiasm of prisoners walking to their cells. Back so soon? A bemused voice echoed through the hallway. Brother Mirth, naturally, his smile as benign as a shark's. Can't get enough of the place, Thalassa replied, not breaking stride. You should really work on your hospitality, though. A nice wine and cheese reception might have improved our last visit. Mirth chuckled, falling in line with the crew. So, what's the plan this time? Industrial espionage. Saving the galaxy. All of the above, Zenth replied, sparing the monk a glance that could wither steel. And if you've got anything that can clear a cough that won't quit, I'd love you forever. Noted, Brother Mirth said, looking a tad too interested for comfort. Soon they were buried in the monastery's archives, dusty, labyrinthine, and about as welcoming as a porcupine in a balloon shop. Thalassa led the way, navigating through rows of data terminals that hummed with ancient knowledge. So, what's the trick to cracking ancient alien encryption with half a prayer and a rust bucket? Grit asked, leaning over Thalassa's shoulder. First, you start with a half-baked plan, Thalassa replied, fingers flying over the keys. Then you add a dash of genius, a sprinkle of desperation, and finish with a full shot of blind luck. Blind luck is my specialty, Mirth offered, somehow managing to look both bemused and serious. Here we go, Thalassa muttered, the screen lighting up with lines of alien script. Now we just... A deafening alarm cut her off, the echoing wail loud enough to rattle bones. The lights flickered, bathing the room in a pulsing red glow. Looks like you've got fans, Callista noted, somewhere between exasperated and impressed. Time for Plan C, Zenth said, already edging towards the exit. Run screaming. Subtlety's overrated, Grit agreed, with a shrug that suggested he'd be more at home in a firefight than diplomacy. Thalassa stabbed one final key, pocketing her data pad with a triumphant grin. Let's move. We can finish this back on the ship. The crew bolted, feet pounding against the floor in a chaotic ballet of panic and purpose. They skidded around corners, narrowly avoiding a group of monks who looked as surprised as their pursuers to be part of this farce. The rust bucket loomed ahead, a promise of escape and a reminder of just how far they still had to go. With the monks hot on their heels, they piled inside, the engines roaring to life with a sound that suggested both foreboding doom and a hint of encouragement. "Punch it," Thalassa shouted, and Grit obliged, the ship leaping into the sky like a startled cat with a firework up its tail. As loonies dwindled behind them, the crew finally exhaled, adrenaline ebbing away like a tide leaving them stranded on the beach of reality. They settled into their seats, each silently contemplating how close they'd come to disaster. "Well," Zenth said, breaking the silence with the soft rasp of a man who'd just run a marathon through a dust storm, "that was invigorating. Next time, let's try something less heart-stopping," Mirth suggested. "Like knitting. Got any bright ideas?" Callista asked, quirking an eyebrow at Thalassa, who was hunched over her data pad like a scholar after a particularly long bender. "Just one," Thalassa replied, her voice a mix of exhaustion and determination. "We finish what we started." The screen before her flickered with the same alien patterns, but now they aligned, coalescing into a coherent whole. With a few deft keystrokes, Thalassa initiated the reprogram. The system hummed, processing her commands with infuriating slowness. "Any chance you could speed that up?" Grit asked, drumming his fingers impatiently. "Unless you want to get out and push," Thalassa snapped, her eyes fixed on the screen. Minutes ticked by, each second an eternity. Then with a beep that seemed almost anticlimactic, the process completed. "That's it?" Zenth asked, disbelief coloring his tone. "That's it," Thalassa confirmed, a weary smile breaking through. "We've reset the failsafe. The virus is contained. The artifacts are neutralized." "Remind me again why we don't get paid more for this," Grit asked, scratching his head. "Because we'd be too rich to work," Callista replied, her grin suggesting she'd be okay with that outcome. "So we saved the galaxy?" Mirth asked, half serious, half sarcastic. "Just another Tuesday," Thalassa replied, leaning back with a long exhale. "Well," Zenth said, a smirk tugging at his lips, "at least we didn't blow up." "Don't jinx it," Mirth warned. "We've still got a long way home." The rust bucket glided through the stars, a testament to human ingenuity, stubbornness, and sheer bloody-mindedness. The crew settled into the rhythm of space travel, weary but triumphant. They had faced down ancient alien artifacts, defied the expectations of the universe, and come out the other side, bruised, battered, but unbroken. It was far from over, but for now it was enough. "Anyone else fancy a drink?" Grit asked, raising his mug in salute to their unlikely victory. "Only if it comes with a side of peace and quiet," Thalassa said, closing her eyes with a sigh. "Here's to that," Callista agreed, settling into her seat. The stars stretched out before them, infinite and uncaring, as the rust bucket sped into the void. One more adventure behind them, and countless more waiting just over the horizon. The rust bucket rattled through the void like a tin can kicked by a bored god, its engines vibrating just enough to remind everyone aboard that space travel was as much about faith as it was about engineering. Thalassa Viridian sat back in her seat, eyes closed, letting the hum of the ship seep into her bones. She didn't know what was more exhausting, outrunning angry monks or outsmarting alien technology. "Here's to hoping we don't run into any more ancient booby traps," Grit said, nursing his coffee like it was the last one he'd ever see. "I'm fresh out of sacrificial lambs. Speak for yourself," Zenth muttered from his corner, looking like the concept of worse for wear decided to take human form. The man was good with a pipette, sure, but running from monks and solving galactic crises didn't seem to be his forte. "I volunteer Mirth next time." "I'm flattered," Brother Mirth replied from where he was reclined, hands behind his head. "But I have a strict no self-sacrifice policy." "Pity," Thalassa said, her eyes still closed. "Would have made for a great story to tell the grandkids." "We saved the galaxy, and Brother Mirth did something useful. Loonies wasn't more than a speck behind them, but the implications of their recent misadventure loomed large in their minds." "So, what now?" Callista asked, not looking up from the nav system she was tinkering with as if the ship's future depended on it. Spoiler alert, it did. "Now we wait for the galactic diplomats to stop their squawking," Thalassa said, finally opening her eyes. Because nothing screams we come in peace like a near-pandemic brought on by holiday souvenirs. Zenth groaned, adjusting his position against the wall. What's the chance they'll just blame us anyway? About the same as this ship making it to the next fuel station without something exploding, Grit replied, a wry grin tugging at his lips. High confidence then, Mirth added, smirking. Thalassa rubbed her temples, feeling the onset of a headache that promised to be as friendly as a cornered rat. All we can do is try to spin this mess into something resembling a happy ending, or at least a tolerable one, Callista suggested, fingers tapping rhythmically on her console. Exactly, Thalassa said, looking around at her crew. We've done the hard part. Now we get to sit back and watch the politicians make a mess of it. Again, the ship's lights flickered ominously as if agreeing with her sentiment. Or perhaps just threatening another electrical failure. Hard to tell with the rust bucket. So we just wait. Zenth asked, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd just been told they had to sit through a lecture on the history of paint drying. Pretty much, Thalassa said. We've given them the data. Let's see if anyone in charge can read it without drooling. Optimistic, Grit noted. You're practically a ray of sunshine. Radiant as a solar flare, Thalassa shot back, though her smile was more genuine than sarcastic. They'd been through the grinder, this crew, but somehow they'd come out the other side with their sense of humor mostly intact. And in this universe, that was worth more than all the alien artifacts in the galaxy. Asterisk, 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 somewhere amidst the chaos of interstellar politics, the message went out. The virus was contained, and the artifacts were rendered harmless, at least until the next ambitious archaeologist decided to play cosmic Jenga with ancient relics. The galaxy collectively exhaled a sigh of relief, though whether it was from relief or resignation was anyone's guess. Either way, the Cold War that had been simmering on the edges of civilization seemed to cool just enough to avoid a full boil. For Thalassa and her crew, it was back to the usual routine of spacefaring life, avoiding space pirates, hunting for the next contract, and keeping the rust bucket from disintegrating into a cloud of metallic regret. Yet, beneath the veneer of normalcy, something had shifted. Funny, isn't it? Mirth said one evening, nursing a mug of what passed for alcohol on their ship, how saving the galaxy doesn't come with a parade or even a thank you card. Gratitude's been on backorder since the last galactic conflict, Grit replied, swirling his own drink. Think the supply chain's still recovering. Besides, Thalassa added, who wants a parade? They're loud, crowded, and the snacks are never as good as they look. Spoken like someone who's never had to march in one, Zenth said, smirking. Though I have to admit I wouldn't mind a little recognition. We've got each other, Callista said, her tone more serious than usual. And the knowledge that we stopped a disaster. Isn't that enough? There was a moment of silence as everyone digested that. On the grand scale of universal significance, they were specks of dust, but specks of dust that had made a hell of a difference. Maybe, Thalassa said finally, but it wouldn't hurt if they sent us some decent coffee or a new ship, Grit suggested. Now you're really dreaming, Mirth said, grinning. They fell into a comfortable rhythm, the kind that only comes from shared crisis and mutual survival. The ship rumbled onward, a reluctant hero of its own narrative, carrying its crew toward whatever madcap adventure awaited them next. Asterisk, 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 as they hurtled through space, Thalassa found herself pondering the future. Humanity had a peculiar knack for stumbling into galactic catastrophes and somehow, miraculously, coming out the other side relatively intact. But how long could that luck hold? Something on your mind? Zenth asked, catching her pensive look as they shared a rare quiet moment. Just thinking about how we keep getting ourselves into these messes, she replied. And whether we'll ever really learn from them, probably not, Zenth said, shrugging. But that's part of what makes us. Well, us. Stubborn, resilient, he corrected. And maybe a little bit cocky, true, Thalassa conceded. But you've got to admit, there's something to be said for the fact that we're still here. Still fighting. That's the human way, isn't it? Zenth said, a hint of pride in his voice. We keep pushing forward, no matter how many times the universe tries to kick us down. Thalassa smiled, feeling that familiar spark of determination reignite within her. They'd overcome impossible odds and emerge stronger for it. And although the galaxy remained a chaotic, unpredictable place, they were ready for whatever came next. Asterisk, 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 the crew gathered on the bridge, a ragtag assembly of misfits and mavericks who had come to trust one another with their lives. There was something comforting in the routine, the sense of shared purpose that bound them together. Well, Grit said, breaking the comfortable silence as he looked around at his crew. Any bets on how long it takes before we find ourselves in another life-or-death situation? 2 weeks, Callista said confidently. Give or take a few days, optimistic, Mirth commented. I prefer to think of it as realistic, Callista replied, grinning. Thalassa chuckled, feeling lighter than she had in days. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. Just like always together, huh? Zenth mused. Sounds like a plan. Not much of a plan, Grit said, though his tone was warm. But it's a damn good start. As the ship continued its journey through the infinite expanse, the crew settled into a comfortable camaraderie, united by the knowledge that they had faced down the universe and won. For now, that was enough. But deep down, each of them knew that new challenges awaited, and that they would rise to meet them with the same grit and determination that had seen them through so many trials before. Here's to the next adventure, Mirth said, raising his mug in a toast. To the next adventure, the others echoed, their voices filled with camaraderie and a touch of defiance. Together, they sailed on through the stars, a testament to the enduring spirit of humanity and the bonds that held them fast in the face of adversity. For all the chaos and uncertainty that lay ahead, they were ready. Ready to fight, to laugh, and to endure whatever the cosmos could throw their way. For in the vast uncertainty of space, they had found something rare and precious. A crew bound not by circumstance, but by choice, and a future forged in the fires of resilience and unity.